The night was quiet, the city lights bouncing off the sleek black luxury car as it rolled to a stop at a red light. Inside, Captain Lisa Monroe adjusted her rearview mirror, unaware that a police cruiser had been tailing her for the past few blocks. A decorated officer with years of service, she knew the law inside and out. But tonight, she wasn't in uniform, and that, she would soon realize, made all the difference. Flashing red and blue lights suddenly filled her mirrors. A long sigh escaped her lips. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. Still, she pulled over, her heartbeat steady, but her instincts on high alert. She had heard too many stories, seen too many cases, where simple traffic stops turned into something much worse. The officer approached, his flashlight beaming into her window. His posture was rigid, his tone sharp. "License and registration," he barked, not bothering with a greeting. Lisa kept her hands visible, moving carefully as she reached for her purse. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer?" she asked, keeping her voice calm. His jaw tightened. "Stolen vehicles like this don't usually belong around here," he muttered, eyeing the luxury interior. That's when she felt it, the assumption, the judgment. He didn't see a professional, decorated officer. He only saw what he wanted to see. Lisa handed over her ID, her police credentials tucked just behind it. He barely glanced at them before stepping back. "Step out of the car," he ordered. Lisa knew she had a choice, comply or reveal who she was. But before she could speak, he reached for his radio, and that's when everything changed. What happened next left everyone speechless. Lisa remained still, her pulse steady, but her mind raced. She had been in situations like this before, just never on the other side of it. The officer, whose name tag read J. Reynolds, kept one hand near his holster as he radioed in something she couldn't quite hear. His eyes darted between her and the vehicle, suspicion carved into his expression. She took a slow breath. "Officer, if you check my..." "Step out, now." His voice was sharp, leaving no room for discussion. Lisa knew she could have pulled out her badge then and there, but something stopped her. Was it curiosity? A test? Or was it the weight of knowing exactly how these situations usually played out? She decided to wait, to see if he would follow protocol, or push past it. As she opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, she noticed how tightly he gripped his flashlight. His stance wasn't just authoritative, it was tense, on edge, as if he expected trouble where there was none. "Turn around. Hands where I can see them," he instructed. Lisa's jaw clenched. She had given no reason for this level of aggression, but before she could respond, another patrol car pulled up, tires screeching slightly as it came to a stop. A second officer, a younger woman, stepped out. She looked from Lisa to Reynolds, hesitation flickering across her face. "Back up. For a traffic stop?" Lisa asked, her voice steady but pointed. Reynolds didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward his colleague. "Ran the plates yet?" The young officer nodded. "Yeah, it's registered to Elisa Monroe." Reynolds smirked. "Interesting. And what are the odds she actually owns it?" Lisa exhaled slowly. He still didn't get it. But he was about to. Lisa's fingers flexed at her sides, but she kept her stance calm. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the unspoken assumptions hanging thick in the air. She had spent years training officers like Reynolds, years teaching them how to handle situations just like this. And yet, here she was, standing on the pavement, treated like a suspect instead of a citizen, instead of a colleague. The young officer shifted uncomfortably. "The registration matches her ID," she said carefully, her eyes darting toward Lisa, as if sensing something was off. Reynolds let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah? Well, let's not jump to conclusions. Stolen cars get fake registrations all the time." He turned to Lisa. "You got proof of purchase?" Lisa tilted her head, studying him. "Do you ask everyone for that, or just me?" His expression hardened. "Just answer the question." Lisa sighed and reached for her phone. "In my glove compartment. I can show you." Reynolds took a step closer. hands where I can see them. The tension thickened. The young officer looked between them, clearly uneasy. Lisa took a slow breath. "Officer Reynolds, I suggest you take another look at my ID." He scoffed. "I saw it." "No, you glanced at it." Her voice was steady, but there was an edge now. "Look again." Reynolds narrowed his eyes, but snatched the ID from his partner's hand. He skimmed it, his confidence unwavering, until his gaze landed on the words, Captain, Lisa Monroe, His face paled slightly. His grip on the ID tightened. Lisa watched him, waiting. Would he admit his mistake, or would he double down? The young officer took a cautious step forward. "Captain Monroe?" Her voice was almost a whisper. Lisa met her gaze. "That's right." But before anything else could be said, the radio crackled to life with an urgent call. And just like that, the night took an unexpected turn. For a long moment, there was silence. The weight of realization settled over Reynolds, but his jaw stayed tight, his posture stiff. His fingers hovered over his belt as if still trying to assert control. The young officer looked between them, her brows slightly raised, as if waiting for Reynolds to acknowledge what was now painfully obvious. Lisa didn't move. She wanted to see what he would do next. Would he back down, apologize, or was his pride too heavy to let him? Before anyone could speak, the radio crackled again, this time with more urgency. "All units, we have a 10 to 32 in progress. Armed suspect on the run near Oakwood and 5th. Officers in pursuit. Backup requested immediately." The young officer grabbed her radio. "Copy that. We're nearby." She glanced at Reynolds. "Should we respond?" Reynolds hesitated, his grip tightening on Lisa's ID before finally handing it back. "We're busy here," he muttered. Lisa narrowed her eyes. "You're seriously ignoring an officer in need of backup." Her voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the sharpness beneath it. Reynolds didn't answer right away. His face was unreadable, but something flickered in his expression, frustration, maybe even embarrassment. "They can handle it." Lisa inhaled slowly, her patience thinning. "You pulled me over for no reason. You assumed I didn't belong in my own car. And now you're choosing to stand here instead of doing your actual job." Reynolds took a step back, his shoulders stiff. "You don't tell me how to do my job." Lisa held his gaze. "That's exactly what I do, Officer Reynolds." For the first time, real uncertainty crossed his face. The young officer shifted beside him. "Captain Monroe, should we?" Before she could finish, the sound of screeching tires and shouting voices cut through the night. Down the street, flashing lights illuminated a chaotic scene. Officers running, a suspect weaving through traffic. Lisa didn't wait. She turned toward her car, making a split-second decision that would change everything. Lisa moved fast, her instincts kicking in before hesitation could slow her down. She wasn't on duty, but that didn't matter now. A suspect was on the run, officers were in pursuit, and she wasn't about to stand by while chaos unfolded just a few blocks away. She reached for her car door, but Reynolds stepped in front of her. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was sharp, but there was something else there now. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. Lisa didn't flinch. "To do your job for you." Reynolds' jaw tightened. "You're not in uniform." Lisa let out a short breath. "And yet, I still outrank you." The young officer shifted nervously. "Captain Monroe, we should go. They need backup." Reynolds hesitated. For the first time, Lisa saw doubt crack through his rigid stance. But before he could say anything, a loud pop split through the air. Then another, gunshots. The street, which had been tense but controlled, erupted into chaos. Officers shouted orders over their radios. A car swerved wildly down the road, its tires screeching. People ran for cover. Lisa didn't wait for permission. She darted past Reynolds, her focus locked on the unfolding scene. The suspect was sprinting toward an alley, weaving between parked cars. An officer chased after him, but he was losing ground. Lisa's eyes flicked to Reynolds. "Still think you have time to waste?" For the first time that night, Reynolds didn't have a quick response. Lisa took off running. She didn't have a badge in her hand or a uniform on her back, but that didn't change who she was. The only thing that mattered now was stopping the suspect before things got worse. And something told her they were about to. Lisa sprinted down the street, her breath steady, her focus sharp. The suspect was fast, but she had seen this play out too many times before. He was desperate, unpredictable, and that made him dangerous. The alley ahead was a dead end. He didn't know it yet, but he was running straight into a trap. Behind her, Reynolds and the young officer finally sprang into action, their radios buzzing with frantic updates. Lisa could hear them closing in, but she didn't slow down. She reached the alley just as the suspect turned the corner, his eyes darting wildly for an escape. "Stop," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. The suspect hesitated for half a second, long enough for Lisa to step forward, blocking his path. He lunged sideways, but Lisa moved faster, sweeping his legs out from under him. He hit the pavement hard, gasping in shock. Before he could recover, Lisa had him pinned. Heavy footsteps pounded behind her as Reynolds and the other officer caught up. Reynolds skidded to a stop, breathing hard, watching as Lisa secured the suspect's hands behind his back. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The truth was right in front of him. More officers flooded the scene, taking control. The suspect was cuffed and lifted to his feet. Lisa stepped back, her adrenaline still high, her gaze locking onto Reynolds. He'd avoided her eyes, his usual confidence shaken. Then, just as Lisa was about to walk away, a senior officer rushed up, eyes wide. "Captain Monroe, are you all right?" he asked. Reynolds flinched. The words hit him like a brick. The realization, the weight of his mistake, it was all sinking in now. Lisa finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "I'm fine, but you might want to have a talk with Officer Reynolds about protocol." The senior officer's expression darkened as he turned to Reynolds. "What's she talking about?" Lisa didn't wait for the answer. She had already proven her point. But as she walked back toward her car, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. Reynolds stood frozen, his face pale. For the first time all night, he understood. And that was the real lesson. Lisa walked back to her car, the cool night air finally settling around her. The chaos had faded, the suspect was in custody, and the flashing lights reflected in the polished surface of her vehicle. She should have felt relief, but instead, she felt something deeper, something heavier. The young officer caught up with her, hesitating before speaking. "Captain Monroe, I..." She stopped, glancing back at Reynolds, who stood stiffly as the senior officer questioned him. "I should have spoken up earlier." Lisa studied her for a moment. "You recognized what was happening?" The officer nodded, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I did, but I didn't say anything." Lisa sighed, but her voice remained steady. "Next time, speak up. That's how things change." The officer nodded again, more firmly this time. Lisa opened her car door, but before she got in, she noticed Reynolds still standing there. He didn't look angry anymore, just lost. He finally met her eyes, and for the first time all night, there was no arrogance in his expression, just quiet realization. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. His face said everything. Lisa held his gaze for a second longer, then got in and shut the door. As she pulled away, she took a deep breath. She had dealt with officers like Reynolds before, and she would again. Some people never changed, but some did. And maybe, just maybe, tonight had been a lesson he wouldn't forget.